Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Saturday News. This is really cool. So BlizzCon is a month away, the schedule has been uploaded, there's a whole bunch we can learn from it. It seems like it'll be a really big year for Blizzard. Of course, over on the WoW front, the 8.1 PTR is moving along, gives us a glimpse of the near future, and even better, we're going to get through an entire video without mentioning Azerite gear. Will I find something to complain about? Well, you know me, probably, but hey, we're done with Azerite if you're interested in that. It was the most recently uploaded video on the channel before this one. And one final thing before we get into the video, Blizzard have given me 5 virtual tickets to give away, so I get you all the virtual ticket stuff, and yeah, free giveaway. If you want to see more of that, hit up the link in the description for more details. So thanks to Blizz for giving them, and let's get into the video. Okay, let's kick it off with BlizzCon, because this year's BlizzCon is going to be pretty damn massive. Now, as WoW players, we're going to get what will feel to us like a hell of a lot, but what's even more noteworthy, of course, is there's almost definitely going to be a new game announcement from Blizzard. I mean, my personal estimate of that's like maybe a 70 to 90% likelihood. So the BlizzCon schedule was posted, and as always, we can learn a lot from it. So what do we have right after the opening ceremony? We've got Diablo, what's next? So consider my interests piqued. Now, Diablo probably has a lot more crossover with the WoW player base than really any of the other two, other like original Blizzard IPs, and probably more than Overwatch as well. So it should be a pretty big one for a lot of us. Now, D3 was odd. It was a critical disaster in the months following its launch, but they managed to reverse its fortunes with a really brilliant Reaper of Souls expansion that left it in a great state. What did they do after that? Nothing. They seemingly forgot to make content for Diablo past its, its free seasonal stuff. And like, it's kind of insane because after Reaper of Souls, D3 was just the perfect content platform. Just fire more expansions on it and make more money, but they didn't do it. So this 4-year Diablo lull has been really odd to me, although 4 years, well, that's that's the amount of time it would take to build a new game, and I mean a new game, not just an entry in a series using the same engine, the same tech. It's not like going from Assassin's Creed Origins to Odyssey, or Forza Horizon 3 to 4, or Call of Duty Black Ops 3 to 4. No, this is more of a Diablo 2 to 3 scale, where like a lot of work would be done. We know that Blizzard have been working on multiple new Diablo projects based on the Diablo update that they released a while back. So this means that we're almost certainly going to have a big new game announcement, so I'm really excited for that. Diablo 4 probably makes the most sense, though, like, if they were to do another numbered entry that kept the same broad ideas, I would expect a lot of things to change. They'll want this to be a game for the modern era based on the lessons learned from Reaper of Souls and the wider industry, so I don't think they would try to attempt to compete with, say, the very hardcore Path of Exile. I'd expect, a twist in the regular Diablo formula in a different direction to that. That said, soft relaunching franchises is all the rage. Maybe even a new genre, right? Like, Sanctuary is a really cool world. It's got some really cool lore, but the existing Diablo games aren't really a great way to explore that. Personally, I'd love a third-person action RPG with a narrative focus in that world. Does Blizzard have the expertise for that? No, they could hire it on though. After all, Overwatch was their first FPS ever, and it worked out pretty damn well. Now, that said, a game like that, it doesn't sound like the infinite money-making machine that I think they would probably like to have. Like, sure, God of War and its compatriots all sold well, but they're not going to hit the revenues of other types of games that are on a more, like, revenue-friendly model. And what they are is they're system sellers. They could break even in the game, but by expanding the platform, it would still be a win for Sony, which is why they get funded. So with that said, I think my personal ideal scenario is a full new Diablo game, plus maybe a Diablo 3 expansion. Why not? I'm sure they have all the tools ready for that. After all, they did say they're working on multiple Diablo projects. Now, I suppose the one thing that I'm not interested in is like remasters or stuff like that. So I'd say popularly, all eyes are on the Diablo team, but moving back to WoW, well, while the game's press won't have much to talk about, I think players certainly will. It does not look like patch 8.1 is going to come out before BlizzCon, but the good news is that it's not really going to be talked to BlizzCon, according to Muffinus, who is going to be a part of the WoW What's Next panel. This means that 8.2 is probably what we talked about, and while the 8.1 versus 7.1 patch timing is a bit different, it does seem like this will be a repeat of BlizzCon 2016, which for players was exciting. 7.2 seemed exciting because we didn't really play it yet, and of course they teased 7.3, which is pretty damn major. So we're entering BlizzCon with the in-game narrative, I think, being a good bit more fiery than it was with Legion, because Legion didn't have a broad story, it was more a short story collection that kind of coalesced into a big big ending? Well, with BFA, it kind of started like that for the Alliance and the Horde, but we already see narrative content that is going to be sort of bringing it all together, because Zol was working with Ashara, you know, the Blood God stuff, Ashara was kind of in that. The Crucible of Storms is directly fighting Ashara minions. We'll be coming off the back of the Siege of Zuldazar, so the stage is really set for it all to come together and for a lot of major plot to happen in 8.2. Now, of course, 7.2 technically was the height of the Legion invasion, but I mean, it was a kind of rubbish patch from the narrative perspective. So, you know, I've got to remember I can't just go full into the story on paper and kind of forget about the game side. Now, that said, 8.2 probably, you know, it could be Nazjatar, it could be something else, Nazjatar coming in 8.3. Either way, I think we're going to get a bit of a tease of what Nazjatar is going to look like. Patch 8.2 is also going to be the first patch that can learn from the content of BFA, because 8.1, that would have been content complete probably before BFA launched, or at the very least it would have been mostly across the line, which means that Blizzard wouldn't really been able to respond to player feedback all that much. So that places 8.2 as really being their first chance to tweak the formula majorly based on how the various elements of BFA have been received. And because of that, I'm very interested. I think the content that they talk about at BlizzCon will be very, very revealing. Okay, next we've got some pretty simple news. Mike Morhaime is stepping down as president, with WoW's J. Allen Brack filling the role. Mike will still advise, but the day-to-day duties, that's on Jay. And that's it really. Look, president is an important organizational role and a figurehead for all the staff and, you know, all that stuff, but it's not a super important creative role. I don't anticipate much in the way of noticeable changes. A lot has been made out of this. I think it's easy to overly narrativize it. In reality, I think Mike's just been working that job for a long time. It's reasonable for him to step down. Of the people who maybe were in the running, Jay got it. There's probably not much more than that. And while I could talk about other things, honestly, it would be a load of bull. I just don't know. So let's move on to the actual game content. Okay, spoiler time. So, there are strange undead happenings, and I think we need to talk about them. Now, in the lead into the Darkshore Warfront, Tyrande appears. She performs the ritual of the Night Warrior to become the Night Warrior. I can't believe I just said that out loud. It is a pretty embarrassing title. Anyhow, it could signal, which this is the good bit, it could signal her being a more active character, maybe the Night Elves resembling their Warcraft 3 version a bit more, which is great. Now, this Tyrande stuff's, well, it's got interesting timing, because while that's happening, Sylvanas sends the Horde and her Valkyr to raise Night Elves, especially Delaran. So while we're there, we kill a bunch of Army of the Black Moon Night Elves, who seem to be following Tyrande, and while we're doing that, we're raising them up, and seemingly they are just on our side. We then bump into Syra, the Warden Emissary NPC from Legion. She gets killed, and then the Valkyr raise both her and Delaran. Okay, but so remember how Lillian Voss was a character that people liked because she had internal conflict coming to terms with what she is? Well, don't worry, none of that conflict is happening here. Tyrande appears and they both decide to cast their lot in with the Forsaken. Yeah, you know, Delaran is now a big sort of for the Queen Forsaken person. In the space of these lines, they say, you know, and you abandoned us, Alune abandoned us, we have nothing left, we are Forsaken. And with that, she renounces the Alliance and all of her people and joins the Forsaken. Now, here's the thing. In the big picture, it kind of works. It's supposed to be a tragic moment, because remember all that talk about killing hope? Well, it kind of worked on her then. And then also in the short story, she called out to Alune before she died, and she got nothing back. So when she accuses Tyrande of abandoning her and Alune of doing the same, there are sensible motivations there. The problem is that this stuff has no room to breathe and no room to grow at a reasonable pace that would allow players to relate to the character. Blizzard try to do a lot, but they don't really do any of the work to earn it. They rely on us placing significance in things after the fact rather than them communicating them well through their narrative. So is this tragic and sad within the experience of playing it and the storytelling that is literally in the game? No. It's only tragic when you sit back and compare the narrative from multiple sources, and that means that you never really feel the narrative. Actually, it's kind of worse than that. You feel a dissonance between what you think and what you're seeing and experiencing in-game, and then what is clearly going on within the minds of the people who are coming up with this story at Blizzard. The game narrative is quite focused on plot and events, and there's very little room for character moments, especially in a compressed quest line like this that's quite short. This is even more of a problem when the events of the narrative are driven by those character motivations, and then that's what leads to people feeling disconnected from the game's characters and therefore disconnected from the game's narrative, because those motivations are left to places that are outside of the game. That makes things really confusing. Now, they've tried to do a lot more with the lore of BFA, and what's odd is they've got really genuine intentions, but they have a really high miss rate. Like, a fair few key moments have been big misses, but even with that, I suppose we have to acknowledge, like, stuff like, say, Jaina, who's really came into her own, finally. It's been a mixed bag for sure, but this scene kind of got to me a little bit. They're dealing with characters like Delarin, who are supposed to be strong, principled people, turning on those principles, right? That's character arc gold. But the problem is you can't go from start to finish without a middle. At that point, the character's actions feel dictated by the limitations of the script and not their own motivations as, like, characters. The hand of the writer shouldn't be that transparent, because at the end of the day, she died, she then woke up and decided to do a complete 180 within the span of maybe a few minutes of consciousness when you think about it. I mean, okay, I guess. Anyhow, Blizzard, they're doing a good job with their overall themes, and I kind of want to cover those as well, because Sylvanas is here raising a new Night Elf Undead army. Now, it's hinted that just a big reason for her doing all this stuff is just to get more Forsaken. She wipes out a Night Elf force, she raises them, and what's cool with 8.1 is we get to see the Lich King's perspective in this, as I covered 2 weeks ago. He says that Sylvanas' actions risk upsetting the balance of things. Of course, Bom Samdi doesn't like it because she's denying him souls, so basically all of the big, powerful undead people are against this, and they all deny having a part in suggesting her to the dying Vol'jin at the start of Legion. Now, this led many people to thinking that the whispers that Vol'jin heard were N'Zoth, but wait, N'Zoth is Void-aligned. Void and undead don't get along. So if N'Zoth knew that she was a powerful force of undeath, would N'Zoth want her in power? Could be that N'Zoth was expecting her to fail and for us to weaken ourselves against her, but that's still a risky bet. But it does kind of give me pause. Something other than N'Zoth could have placed her on the throne, something that we don't know, and I think that's a pretty exciting mystery. Then finally, there is some plot with Saurfang. It's not mega important, but I kind of want to make a point with it, I suppose. Basically, you, Zelkan, and a bunch of Dark Rangers are sent by Sylvanas to track down Saurfang. Of course, you, Zelkan, and Saurfang kill the Dark Rangers and go to Org empty-handed. Now, canonically, this means that all players betray their war chief in this questline. They're given no choice, and it's just an example of having an overly dictated narrative that's not driven by players when you ultimately are in a pretty player-driven game genre. So looking at the old Soldier cinematic and the subsequent in-game stuff, it's so damn clear that Blizzard are expecting all Horde players to be fully on side with Saurfang. And they've made that their story to play out that way. Well, if you're writing a book and the protagonist of the book makes a decision, that's fine. Thing is, WoW's not a book. Players have agency, so being forced through a plot line that is character-driven by forces other than your character, that's kind of tricky because it means your character sometimes acts in a way that they wouldn't act. And that's a bit of a problem. Now, I'm not sure how you get around this, to be honest, but the point is that betraying Sylvanas for Saurfang makes no sense if, as an example, you're a Forsaken character. Now, where this gets really odd is that, well, the player character is very confused because you help Saurfang with treason by killing Sylvanas' most loyal Dark Ranger soldiers, and then you help Sylvanas raise new undead. Those things are very much at odds with each other, so the only way for that to make sense is if you headcanon that your character is playing both sides, and I don't think players should have to do that. Basically, I think the Blizzard need to remember that while they do want their big story, ultimately, our characters have to feel like active protagonists in their own story. And I think that's what they're really struggling with in this modern era of WoW storytelling. So in the old era of vanilla, TBC, and Wrath, your protagonist was following their own story, through the world, doing small problems. They were doing that rather than sort of, standing around bearing witness to Blizzard's characters doing RP and just things happening that are kind of out of their control. And I think that's why, even though the narrative of WoW was mostly non-existent in some of the older eras of the game, the player, the feeling of your character being a character in that world was probably stronger back then. It's very hard, though, doing MMO storylines. I absolutely don't envy the position that they're in with that. I suppose I bring it up because obviously I work within games, and doing game narratives is super interesting to me. And I suppose it's a unique and challenging problem that they're obviously trying to take it from different angles with different expansions, and it's interesting seeing how it all pans out. And finally, let's round today off by talking about the PTR. So narrative aside, the PTR is actually moving on quite nicely. Blizzard have added an NPC that lets you do Legion LFR raid solo queue, which is pretty great. Opens that up. However, you still have to contend with Legion content not falling under legacy loot rules. Past that though, the faction incursions are now testable. Now I've not got around to checking this out, but I'll do it pretty soon. It pretty much, it's like the big bit of new world content. It's conceptually similar to the Legion invasions, but I don't know if they're doing anything to shake up that formula, so we'll have to check that out. Now with classes, nothing major yet. We do see some early changes, like with the elemental shaman talents. However, there's still a fair bit left to go there before I cover it. Now, in the visual front, most of it is there, bar a few sets, so we'll probably do a big fancy preview video soon. And it shouldn't take overly long for this thing to come together, being honest with you. Patch 8.1 is not being talked about that much at BlizzCon, so I'm assuming that we're maybe going to get that a week after the con, maybe 2 weeks after the con, after the classic beta is over. Siege of Zuldazar is probably going to unlock with 8.1.5, just like with how the Nighthold unlock work with 7.1.5, and that should be maybe 2.5 months after the patch hits. So we're likely to see new world content, or just new content within WoW, really in the next 2 months, probably a month and a half, then a new raid 2.5 months after that, then probably an 8.2.5 a few months after that. And it seems like a pretty strong schedule. That's what makes sense in my head. I'm sure 8.1 is a bit different, like a bit slower out of the gate than 7.1 was, but to be honest, 7.1 probably did come out a bit early, and it probably would have been better to space that out. But it's certainly interesting, and unlike with how some of Legion was, we still don't really know how this expansion is going. Like, past Crucible of Storms, stuff's going to get real weird, and I suppose with BlizzCon, that's what we're going to find out. So yeah, just as someone who's interested in the broad direction of the lore of the Warcraft universe, I think BlizzCon is going to be really, really major, which is pretty damn exciting. So yeah, there you go. That's the news for this week. Interesting stuff, I suppose. We got into some idea territory, which is what I sort of try to, do where we can. It's hard on the narrative. As much as I'm critical of it, I definitely am critical of it, very much knowing that it's an extremely hard problem to solve within an MMO, but it's a very interesting discussion topic. But yeah, with that, thank you very much for watching. A massive thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting the channel. It means a hell of a lot. And over on Patreon, you get early access to videos. I believe there's a video on Zal that should be up now. And there's also the Master Tier, which we do not have this month's stuff for yet. However, as a bonus, we have about 100 of these, I think 125, 130 left over from EGX. So, I'm going to put them in this month's Master Tier. They're nice little, art cards for the game that we're working on. So you can check that out. And their support is really awesome. So with all that said, thank you very much, and I will see you next time.